All right, week 4 of the 2022 college football season has come and gone. It's in the books. A lot of great games this past weekend. People complaining all last week that it wasn't a very good slate of games, and I tried to tell people a lot of times the best games of the week end up being games you don't expect anyway. And man, we had some great games this past week. Of course, Arkansas and Oklahoma both lost, and Tennessee finally got the monkey off its back, beating Florida in Knoxville. So you know there's going to be some shakeups in the top 10. In today's video, I'm going to give you my updated top 25, the only top 25 that actually matters. Let's go. Yeah, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Some of them are even watchable. I don't know. This one might not be watchable, but it's great for argument, debate, and conversation. Be sure to let me know down in the comments of this video as it goes along where you think I got these rankings wrong. And don't just tell me I'm wrong. Tell me where you think these teams should be ranked. Let's start by putting my last week's poll up so you know sort of where I started from, right? So here's my week 4 poll that I put out last week. As you can see here, I had Oklahoma at 6. They lost. They'll be dropping. I had Arkansas at 11. They lost. They'll be dropping. Tennessee beat Florida. How far up will I move them? We'll see. I had Florida at 25, and Tennessee beat them by 5 at home. We'll see. Anyway, that's a look at my rankings from last week. Let's get into this week's top 25. All right, here we go. And as you can see, there are some major shakeups, not only in my top 10, but also down at the bottom of the poll as well, 20 through 25. We've got some new teams entering the poll this week. Teams that dropped out of my top 25 this week: Florida, Miami, and Texas. All 3 lost. I had Texas at 17 last week. I had Miami at 24. I had Florida at 25. All 3 lost. All 3 dropped out. Moving into the Uncle Lou top 25 for the first time this season: Kansas State at 25, Kansas at 24, and Florida State at 20. Let's start at number 1. I'll go through 25. I'll do my best to explain to you why I have these teams ranked where I do. One of the biggest complaints I hear about people when it comes to top 25s, whether it's the AP, the coaches, eventually the playoff poll, other people's rankings that they put out on social media or the internet, one of the biggest complaints I get is they don't explain why they have one team ranked where they do. Now, I don't expect everyone to agree with my reasoning or agree with where I have every team ranked, but at least I'm going to try to explain to you why I have teams ranked where I do. Let's start with the top 3. First off, in my opinion, there's no way to get the top 3 wrong unless you have a different top 3 than this. To me, these are clearly the best 3 teams in college football. I've gone back and forth over the years on exactly what types of criteria I've used to rank teams and move teams around and things like that. After the first month of the season, we're 4 weeks in. It's basically 33% of the season gone. I feel like I've seen enough from Ohio State, Bama, and Georgia to comfortably say that I feel like they're the best 3 teams in the country. As far as who should be ranked where, 1, 2, and 3, again, I really don't think there's a wrong answer. If anybody wants to leave Georgia at 1, if you had them there last week, I'm okay with that. If you want to bump Bama up to 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State 3, I'm okay with that. Any order you want to put these teams in, I'm not going to argue or debate with you because, to me, there really is no wrong way to rank these top 3. I'm going to tell you why I have these 3 ranked the way I do. What I have decided to do, we're a month into the season, I'm convinced these are the 3 best teams. So what I'm going to do every single week is I'm going to watch Ohio State, Bama, and Georgia. And whichever team, to me, looks the most impressive from week to week, that's who I'm going to put number 1. I thought Georgia was the most impressive team over the first 3 weeks of the season, which included big wins over Oregon and South Carolina, so I finally moved them up to number 1 last week in my ranking. This week, to me, the most impressive team I saw between the 3 was Ohio State. I think what Ohio State did to Wisconsin is a little bit more impressive than what Alabama did to Vandy. Now, when you play a team like Vandy, which is a bad team, I don't want to sit here and take shots at Vandy. They're off to a better start than normal, but they're still nowhere near anything relating or resembling a top 25 team. They are further down that list even than Wisconsin, who Ohio State beat up on. Now, both Ohio State and Alabama were extremely impressive, dominated their opponents. But to me, doing that to Wisconsin at home is more impressive than Bama doing that to Vandy. That doesn't mean that I necessarily think Ohio State is better than Bama. if these three teams, Ohio State, Bama, and Georgia, were to play some kind of series, if Ohio State and Bama played 5 times, I think Ohio State would win some and Bama would win some. If Bama and Georgia played 5 times, I think they each would win some. And if Ohio State and Georgia played 5 times, I think they each would win some. So this isn't an indication necessarily that I would pick Ohio State to beat Bama or even Bama to beat Georgia. These top 3, to me, is how impressed I was with each team this past weekend. Georgia, a 17-point win over Kent State. Georgia was extremely sloppy, multiple turnovers, worst defensive performance of the season. They gave up 22 points to Kent State, whereas in the first 3 games combined, they only gave up 10 points total. I'm not jumping off of a bridge here, worried about Georgia. They're still only giving up 8 points per game on average through the first 4 games of the season. They've given up 32 points. They've played 4 games. 32 divided by 4, 8. For all you South Carolina people that can't do basic math, they're still giving up only 8.8 or 8 points per game. I don't have any real concerns or anything coming out of this Kent State game for Georgia. It was an early game against a lower classification team, and for whatever reason, Georgia played sloppy. Kent State played good. Kent State's a good team. They're not a great team. They're not a top 25 team. I'm not going to sit over here and try to pump up Kent State. It was a bad performance by Georgia. So for that reason, based on the criteria that I've decided to use for these 3 teams going forward until one of them loses, obviously if Ohio State, Bama, or Georgia were to lose, they're going to drop down this ranking. But as long as Ohio State, Bama, and Georgia remain undefeated, I'm going to rank them using the same criteria every single week, which is whichever team looks most impressive to me in the previous weekend is going to be number 1. The next most impressive team is going to be number 2, and so forth and so on for 1, 2, and 3. And this week, Ohio State 1, Bama 2, Georgia 3. I've got Michigan at 4. I think Michigan is in a category by itself. Right now, from what I've seen through the first month of the season, Michigan is the most impressive team to me, not named Ohio State, Bama, or Georgia, and they did it again this past weekend. Now, a lot of people were waiting sort of to judge Michigan until they played a Power 5 opponent. For whatever reason, Michigan did not schedule a single Power 5 non-con opponent for 2022. So their first 3 games of the season not only were against group of 5 teams, but were against 3 of the worst group of 5 teams you can find anywhere. Now, it's a Michigan's credit. They didn't beat them by 17, 39-22 like Georgia did against Kent State. They absolutely humiliated all 3 of the Power 5 opponents they played. They scored over 150 points in their first 3 games. The defense looked amazing. Blake Corum is probably one of the best 5 running backs in the country up there. They finally made a decision at quarterback going with J.J. McCarthy, which I feel is the right decision. We'll see if that bears out over the course of the year. But Michigan, to me, has been very impressive and is clearly a 4. You hear a lot of people going back and forth about Ohio State, Georgia, and Bama, and I get that. And people like to break these teams up into tiers. Well, you got Georgia, Bama, and Ohio State. Then you got this group of teams. Then you got this group of teams. To me, there's no one else right now with Michigan. I think they're clearly a 4 right now. After Michigan, I've got Southern Cal. Southern Cal had an impressive road win this weekend. Now, they didn't blow anybody out. What they beat? Washington State? Is that who I believe it was? Washington State. Let's see. Do I have it written down here? Oregon State. I'm sorry. They beat Oregon State 17-14. Oregon State was previously undefeated. And I'll admit I'm higher on Oregon State than most other people are, even going back to the preseason. A lot of the live shows and videos that I made during the offseason, I talked about Oregon State and how I felt like they were going to be better than most people thought. They were undefeated headed into this Southern Cal game. It was a good game. Southern Cal did get the road win. Probably the most impressive win Southern Cal has had this season. Now they've blown some people out. And Southern Cal's defense continues to impress with the turnovers. People keep wondering how long can this last? Sort of living off turnovers, the defense over there, especially considering it's a Lincoln Riley defense. Well, it's an Alex Grinch defense, but you know what I'm saying. Lincoln Riley notoriously at Oklahoma just didn't even attempt to play defense. Southern Cal so far this year is playing better defense than any Oklahoma team Lincoln Riley ever had. We'll see if that can keep up over the course of the season, but right now I've got Southern Cal just behind Michigan at 4th. They play Arizona State this coming weekend, who just fired their coach, Herm Edwards, a couple of weeks ago. So it should be another big win this coming weekend for Southern Cal. I don't think I mentioned it, but Michigan plays on the road at Iowa, which can be a tough place to play. Iowa's not a great team, but they do have a pretty good defense. We'll see if Iowa can slow down that running game of Michigan with Blake Corum and what they can do with J.J. McCarthy. But a tough road test coming up for Michigan this weekend after handling Maryland at home by 1 touchdown, 34-27. Alabama plays on the road this week at Arkansas. Could be a great game. It was a great game last year. Last year, that game came down to a onside kick at the end. Arkansas got within 1 score, attempted an onside kick towards the end of the game, didn't get it, and Alabama hung on to win at home. This year, Alabama's got to travel to Arkansas. And for whatever reason, Alabama has not been the same team on the road over the last couple of years that we're accustomed to seeing. Of course, they lost on the road to Texas A&M last year in a game where they didn't play well. They didn't play good at all this year on the road at Texas. This now their second road game of the year. We'll see how they handle it. Should be a crazy environment. I know Arkansas lost this past weekend to Texas A&M, but that's going to be a crazy atmosphere. That's going to be a pretty good game coming up this weekend. Alabama on the road at Arkansas. And Georgia plays on the road at Missouri, so Georgia should get back to what we're accustomed to seeing from Georgia, which is them blowing out inferior teams. We'll see. But those are the upcoming games for those first few teams. 6 through 10. I've got Oklahoma State at 6. Now, I feel like a lot of people aren't talking about Oklahoma State this week because they didn't play this past weekend. They were off. And honestly, I feel like not a lot of people were talking about Oklahoma State even during the first 3 weeks of the season when they were absolutely destroying people. And kind of like Southern Cal, I'm surprised at Oklahoma State's defense. Now, they gave up probably more points than they should have in week 1. But overall, Oklahoma State's defense has been better this year than I thought it would be. Now, I know they had a great defense last year, so maybe you're thinking you shouldn't be that surprised. But I really thought losing that defensive coordinator would have a bigger impact on Oklahoma State than it has. Jim Knowles, who, of course, is now the defensive coordinator at Ohio State and has already made a huge difference there. Plus, Oklahoma State lost a lot of talent off of last year's defense. But Spencer Sanders, the quarterback for Oklahoma State, is putting up video game numbers through the first 3 games of the season. I actually have him on my Heisman list. I have a top 5 Heisman list that I do every Sunday on the Your Season Is Over video. If you're curious, in no particular order, my top 5 Heisman candidates right now: Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, C.J. Stroud, Stetson Bennett, and Spencer Sanders. I've got other names on my list, but those are the top 5. If you want to know my whole list, go watch the Your Season Is Over video. I do the Heisman portion towards the end. I know that video is an hour long, but I do the Heisman stuff towards the end. So if you want to hear my thoughts on Heisman, potential Heisman candidates, dark horses, long shots, favorites, all that, go watch like the last 10 or so minutes of that Your Season Is Over video that I do every Sunday. At number 7, I've got Clemson. Well, Oklahoma State plays on the road at Baylor this weekend, which is going to be a huge game. I am still a believer in Baylor. I'll talk more about them in a second, but I still think Baylor could win the Big 12. They lost on the road earlier at BYU, so they've got the 1 loss. Oklahoma State's undefeated. Huge game. Lots of huge games this weekend. Ranked versus ranked. People complaining not enough ranked versus ranked games last week. You got plenty of them this week. Already talked about Alabama and Arkansas. We've got Clemson plays NC State. You've got Kentucky and Ole Miss. You've got Baylor and Oklahoma State. Bunch of ranked versus ranked this weekend. But anyway, so Oklahoma State, I've got them at 6. Huge game coming up this weekend on the road at Baylor. At number 7, I've got Clemson. Now, I'm impressed in that Clemson won the game and their offense looked really, really good. Here's my, I don't know if you want to call it a problem, issue, question, whatever with Clemson. To me, Clemson's offense is clearly better than last year's. I don't think there's any debating that. Clemson's offense has looked better this season in every game they've played than almost anything I saw last year, with the exception of the Wake Forest game last year. Clemson's offense looked amazing against Wake Forest last year. Everybody's offense looked amazing against Wake Forest last year. They had one of the worst defenses in the Power 5, and they have a terrible defense again this year. That being said, DJ Ukulele played a great game, definitely the best game of his career. He played good on the road at Notre Dame, or was that at home? I don't remember. Anyway, a couple of years ago when Trevor Lawrence was hurt. But outside of that, this was the best game he has played. Sam Hartman played great too, the quarterback for Wake Forest. He actually threw 6 touchdown passes. Unbelievable. But Clemson gets the win in overtime against a good Wake Forest team. I mean, you might not think Wake Forest is top 10. I don't either. But they did play for the ACC title last year. They've got an amazing quarterback in Sam Hartman. Their offense puts up video game numbers every single week. What surprised me or worried me, or my question, or whatever you want to call it, is Clemson's defense. Last year, Clemson had an amazing defense and couldn't move the ball, so they won a bunch of low-scoring games. And even when they played Wake Forest and they put up 40-something points, they held Wake Forest to, I think, 20 or 21 last year. Clemson's defense was supposed to be better this year than last year's. So far, that's not been the case over the course of the season. And Clemson's secondary in particular has showed some serious signs of weakness. Now, I sort of expected that headed into the season, But you thought Clemson's front seven would be so dominant that might help disguise that or mask some of the questions or weaknesses they had on the back end. That was not the case this past Saturday. Wake Forest went up and down the field on them. And it just makes me wonder, when Clemson plays some of these ACC teams they have coming up on the schedule that have much better defenses than Wake Forest, are they going to be able to score enough points offensively to win the game? Even though I know they've got a good defense, especially front seven, if some of these teams start throwing the ball on Clemson offensively and their defense is able to at least somewhat limit Clemson's offense, which Wake Forest was not able to do, is Clemson going to be able to jump those hurdles? They've got one this week is it on the road at NC State? I think it's home. It's home against NC State. And Clemson hasn't lost at home in like 6 years or something. It's just an insane streak that Clemson is on at home. It's going to be a great game. I don't know yet who I'm going to pick to win that thing, but NC State has a much better defense than Wake Forest. If they're able to slow down that Clemson offense and hold them to, in the 20s, I think NC State's got a chance to win if they can have success throwing the ball. It's going to be a really good game. I've got Clemson at 7. Coming in at number 8, I've got Penn State. I was a little worried about Penn State this past week, coming off that beatdown they put on Auburn at Auburn last week. Penn State showed no signs of slowing down. Another impressive win for Penn State, 33-14 over Central Michigan. Central Michigan, not a great team, not going to pretend like they are. But you see teams a lot when they have some sort of huge win or an emotional game, they have somewhat of a letdown the following week. I didn't see that from Penn State. That running back they have is unbelievable. That freshman, Nick Singleton. Quarterback Sean Clifford is doing what you expect Sean Clifford to do, which is to be a good, not great quarterback, protect the ball, sort of a game management type of situation there with Sean Clifford. But Penn State's defense is pretty good. That running game is really good. I'm not sure they need an elite game-changing, playmaking QB to win 10-plus games this year. We'll see what they do. We'll see what they do this week against Northwestern. Should be another win for Penn State. They should remain undefeated, but I've got them at number 8. Okay, now here's where it starts to get interesting for me because I'm pretty confident in my top 8. There's a couple of spots I'm not maybe 100% confident in. Maybe maybe you move Clemson up or down a spot. Maybe you swap Penn State and Oklahoma. But I'm confident in that top 8. 9 on. I think there's room for serious debate on who should be ranked where, particularly like 9 through 12, right? I've got Kentucky at 9 and Tennessee at 10. Tennessee's got 2 wins this year that in most years they would have found a way to lose. On the road at Pitt, a game that went to overtime. First of all, they were down 10 points in the first quarter, about to be down 17 before they picked off a Keaton Slovis pass in the end zone. They came back from that deficit, fought into the fourth quarter on the road. The game went to overtime, and Tennessee, instead of finding a way to lose, which is what they've been doing for years, found a way to win. And then you have the Florida game where everyone knows the stats, 1-17 against Florida in the last 18 years, just haven't been able to beat Florida to save their life. Florida comes into Knoxville, plays probably the best game they've played all year. Well, why is that? Is that, Anthony Richardson looked like a Heisman contender, and he's been terrible for 2 weeks in a row. Is that because Tennessee's defense is that bad? Is that because it's kind of a rivalry game and everybody just sort of played up to their potential? I don't know. But the point is Tennessee won the game, and that's unusual. We haven't seen that from Tennessee, and now we've seen it twice this year. A road win for Tennessee where they were behind early, came back, went to overtime, and found a way to win. And then a win in a rivalry game at home where they've been finding ways to give those things away. So Tennessee deserves a ton of credit for those 2 wins. With that being said, I felt like Tennessee was probably 3 touchdowns better than Pitt and should have ran away with that game, and they didn't. Florida, outside of the Utah game in week 1, has looked horrible. I mean, it's not that they haven't looked great. They've looked horrible for 2 weeks in a row. Should have lost to South Florida last week. And it ends up being a 5-point game in a game where Tennessee controlled the game from start to finish. Should have won this game by 17, 21 points. They let Florida hang around. Tennessee couldn't get off the field on 4th downs. I think Florida was 5 of 6 on 4th down conversions. this game should not have been that close, and it was. And I'm torn on what to make of that. I do think Tennessee's a really good team. This is the best team Tennessee's had since at least 2016, and it may be better than that. But I'm torn. I don't know what to make of these games where I feel like not only is Tennessee better than these teams, they're significantly better, but these games are just so close. I don't know what to make of that, because on the one hand, I think it's a huge deal that Tennessee is winning these close games instead of losing them. On the other hand, I feel like Tennessee should have won both the Pitt and the Florida game by more. So I've got Kentucky at 9 and Tennessee at 10. Kentucky didn't look great this past weekend. They beat Northern Illinois, which is not a good team at all, 31-23. Tennessee got a big win over a rival, Florida. And if Tennessee and Kentucky play tomorrow, I might pick Tennessee to win. I really don't know what to do here with Kentucky and Tennessee. I'm okay with having them at 9 and 10. The order could easily be flip-flopped. Now, these teams obviously play each other every single year. They're in the same division, and they're going to play down the road coming up here in a few weeks. So we'll find out for sure. It was a great game last year. Tennessee won 45-42, a back-and-forth sort of a track meet shootout type of game. Tennessee is off this coming week before traveling to LSU next week, which is going to be a huge game. LSU, in my opinion, is getting better every single week. If you only watched LSU back in week 1 against Florida State, you probably think they're terrible. They've looked better every single week they've played since then. That's going to be a tough game, tough environment on the road in Baton Rouge for Tennessee in 2 weeks. And Kentucky this week has to play on the road at Ole Miss. And Ole Miss is a scary good team. You see, I've got them at 11. Kentucky could 100% lose that game on the road at Ole Miss. Ole Miss has been very impressive. Very impressive. What'd they do this past weekend? They beat Tulsa 35-30. What was the score of that one? 35-27. Didn't blow them out, but Tulsa, again, you see the name Tulsa. Tulsa has the number 1 passing offense in the country. Number 1 passing offense in the country. Ole Miss beats them 35-27. Didn't blow them out. Maybe you say that's not a very impressive win. Okay. If you watch Ole Miss play, they are really good offensively, especially when it comes to running the ball. The quarterback is getting better every single week. And if that defense can take a couple of steps forward, Ole Miss is going to be a tough out for anybody they play. That includes all the teams in the SEC West that they got coming up. Texas A&M, Arkansas, Mississippi State, LSU, Bama. I actually picked Ole Miss to beat Bama in the preseason. Obviously, Bama will be a favorite in that game, but Bama has to travel to Ole Miss late in the year. If Ole Miss keeps improving, especially defensively, that's going to be an interesting game. We'll see what happens this week when Kentucky travels to Oxford and the Grove to take on the Rebels and Ole Miss. It's going to be a great game, one of the better games of the weekend. So if you're a Tennessee fan and you're upset about Tennessee being at 10 instead of 9 and you think they're better than Kentucky, you may be right. Kentucky, if they lose to Ole Miss this weekend, you'll move up by default, so it won't really matter. The point is, I think Kentucky and Tennessee deserve to be ranked pretty close to each other at this point in the season. Both have been impressive so far. Both are undefeated. Both have some pretty good wins. I've got Kentucky at 9, Tennessee at 10, Ole Miss at 11. At 12, I've got NC State. They are still undefeated. Looked shaky, especially in that week 1 game, but they blew out UConn this past weekend 41-10. And again, whether you think I've got NC State too low or too high, okay, they play on the road at Clemson this coming weekend. So you probably shouldn't spend too much time complaining about where NC State is ranked in anyone's ranking or poll this week, because we're going to find out a lot more about them this coming week when they travel to Death Valley to take on the Taters. Another ranked versus ranked game coming up this weekend. It's going to be really, really good. NC State on the road at Clemson. I dropped Oklahoma down to 13, and I'm going to be honest with you. I thought about putting them all the way down at 20. I settled on 13. I still think Oklahoma is a pretty good team. For whatever reason, Kansas State has kind of figured out the Oklahoma riddle. Kansas State has now beat Oklahoma 3 of the last 4 years, okay? Oh, and this stretches now 2 different coaching staffs for Oklahoma, the Lincoln Riley staff and now the Brent Venables staff. We've seen Oklahoma in those years where they lose to Kansas State go on to win the Big 12 at 11-1 or whatever the case. There's no reason to think, at least right now, that Oklahoma still can't accomplish that. So maybe the fact that they lost to Kansas State, same Kansas State team who lost the week before to Tulane, maybe you look at that and you say they deserve to drop further than 13. You're probably right. Based just on that, they probably do deserve to drop further than 13. However, I'm giving Oklahoma some benefit of the doubt here. I've seen Oklahoma do this before. I've seen really good Oklahoma teams lose to Kansas State for no particular reason and then run the table and win the Big 12 and even make the playoffs in some years. I'm not suggesting that will be the case this year, but that's some of the thought process that went into my mind when I decided to leave Oklahoma at 13, or to move Oklahoma only down to 13 as opposed to all the way down to 20th. I went back and forth on several different spots in here between 13 and 20. I ended up having them right here at 13. They play on the road at TCU this coming week. TCU's undefeated. Okay, so we'll see. It's a road game for Oklahoma. We'll see how they do. If they beat TCU, depending on how they beat them, they'll probably stay about the same. Obviously, it matters what happens around them. I don't think beating TCU would be a reason to move Oklahoma all the way back up to 6 or something like that. If they lose, obviously, they'll drop a little bit further down. But we'll see. I don't think the fact that Oklahoma lost to Kansas State this weekend means they're going 8-4 is what I'm saying. I've seen Oklahoma do this before, so I decided to move them down to 13. I've got Oregon at 14 and Utah at 16, and the reason I'm mentioning that in skipping 15 for now, I flip-flopped Oregon and Utah. Last week, I had Oregon at 16 and Utah at 14. All I did this week was flip-flop them. Why did I do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, we're a month into the season. I'm looking at both Utah and Oregon's resume. On Oregon, I see a loss to a top 3 Georgia team. On Utah's resume, I see a loss to an unranked Florida team. That's the main reason I decided to flip-flop them. Oregon has a loss to a much better team than Utah. The other reason is, much like Southern Cal, I feel like Oregon had an impressive small road win this past weekend. Oregon went on the road, let me see, where is it? And beat Washington State 44-41. Now, here's the thing. We've seen Oregon lose these games in years past. They found a way to win this one, okay? Washington State was undefeated. A lot of people stopped paying attention to the Pac-12 some amount of years ago and have never really started paying attention again outside of the top 2 or 3 teams every single year, which tends to be Oregon, Utah, and then maybe one other team a year. The Pac-12 might be having the best year this year it's had in the entire playoff era. I don't know that they'll have a team that makes the playoffs, which they've done twice back in 14 and 15. Oregon and Washington made the playoffs. Don't know that they'll have a team make the playoffs, but top to bottom, I feel like right now the Pac-12 is the best that it has been in the playoff era. Oregon State is a respectable team. Washington State is a respectable team. Washington, as you can see, is a top 25 team. Oregon and Utah, I believe, are legitimate top 25 teams. I feel like top to bottom, the Pac-12 is getting a lot better than what we're used to seeing over the last 7 or 8 years. And I think Oregon going on the road here to an undefeated Washington State and winning in a game where they were losing for the majority of the game, so they came back and won this one. I feel like that's a pretty good. Win. You look at Utah. What did Utah do? They beat Arizona State 34-13. Arizona State's a terrible team in give-up mode with no head coach. So I feel like Oregon winning on the road against Washington State is more impressive than Utah winning on the road at Arizona State. Plus, Oregon has a loss to a better team than Utah, so that's why I flip-flopped them. Minnesota, I've got at 15. I moved them all the way up from 22 in my previous poll. Minnesota absolutely mollywopped Michigan State this past weekend on the road in East Lansing at Michigan State. Took Mel Tucker and those boys to the woodshed 34-7. If you have not watched Minnesota play this year, you need to find time to watch them play. Mohamed Ibrahim is the best running back in the country that nobody seems to know about. They've got a quarterback that's putting up good numbers in Tanner Morgan. They are very well coached. Everybody knows about PJ Fleck. He's one of those coaches that we use that saying about, right? He gets the most out of the available talent that he has. Well, he does, and he's doing it again this year. They're not just beating people, they're blowing people out. They're clearly the best team in the Big Ten West right now. And I know the Big Ten West is down and it's garbage because Wisconsin is no good and Nebraska's in the toilet and Iowa, can't score in double digits. I get it. Minnesota is a really, really good team. Are they going to beat? Are they going to win the Big Ten? Are they going to beat an Ohio State, a Penn State, a Michigan in a Big Ten title game? Probably not. But they're a legitimate top 15 team right now, in my opinion. They are absolutely working people. I've got the Golden Gophers coming in at number 15, and they play Purdue this week. another team that can't seem to get out of its own way. Another terrible team that just keeps losing and losing. I think they lost their quarterback this past weekend, Adrian O'Connell or whatever. Not a good start to the season for Purdue. You would assume Minnesota would keep it rolling this week with a win over Purdue. We'll see. At 16, I've got Utah. I talked about that. 17, I've got Baylor. I have not written Baylor off from being a playoff team. I'm not going to lie. I know they lost on the road to BYU, but Baylor won the Big 12. Excuse me. Baylor won the Big 12 last year, right? Played a New Year's Six game. There's only one more step up to go above that. That's playoffs. So I do feel like Baylor is a team that has playoff aspirations. Now, they're playing for their lives every single game the rest of the year because a 2-loss Baylor team, even if they win the Big 12, is not making the playoffs. I feel like they know that. Every week is going to seem like a must-win game for Baylor, including this past weekend when they went on the road and beat Iowa State, beat them 31-24. Now, Iowa State's not a great team this year, but that can be a tricky place to play. It can be a difficult place to play. Baylor went in and got the win. Now, this week, they got to play Oklahoma State. That's a whole different animal. That is a whole different animal. Oklahoma State's offense is unbelievable. Baylor could get knocked out of the playoff race this weekend. We'll see. This is going to be another one of those rank versus rank games. There's a bunch of them this weekend. I'm expecting this to be a good game. I don't think Oklahoma State's going to blow Baylor out. I think Baylor's too well coached. I love Dave Aranda. He's one of the hottest names in coaching right now. I think this is going to be a great game, but I've got Baylor at 17. And with a few wins, look, they're going to play Oklahoma State. That's a top 10 team. They got to play Oklahoma still, right? They're going to play Kansas, who's undefeated. They've got some big games coming up. If they can string together some wins, they're going to start to move back up these rankings. This week, I've got them at 17. Washington, I've got at 18. They just keep winning and winning and winning. They did it again this past weekend against Stanford, 40-22. This week, they play on the road at UCLA, another undefeated Pac-12 team that I forgot to mention earlier. Washington at 18. Wake Forest, talked about them. They did lose to Clemson this past weekend. Okay, well, Clemson's a top 5 team according to most rankings. And even in my ranking, I've got them as a top 7 team at number 7. And they lost by 1 score in overtime. Last week, I had Wake Forest at 18. Do you punish Wake Forest for losing a 1-score overtime game to a top 7 team? I moved them down to 19. That wasn't a punishment for Wake Forest. That was me moving Washington up. I had Washington at 20 last week, moved them to 18. I just feel like Washington with a win deserved a little bump, and it just so happened that Wake Forest was one of the teams that they jumped. Florida State making the debut in the UNCLELOU Top 25 this week at number 20. They blew out Boston College this past weekend. You know, people are going to give me the whole who have they played thing, and I get it. But if you play a bad team, the best you can do is blow them out, and that's what Florida State did, 44-14. And every single week that goes by, that win against LSU is looking better and better. I don't care how they got it. I don't care that LSU missed extra points and dropped pass or whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. LSU's looking like a better and better team every single week, and that's making Florida State look better every single week. It also doesn't hurt that Florida State keeps blowing people out. Now, this week, they play Wake Forest. So, again, with the rank versus rank, okay? We're going to have a top 20 matchup, Florida State, Wake Forest. And it's at Florida State. It's a home game for Florida State, just like it was this past weekend against Boston College. This is going to be a good game. This will be Florida State's biggest test, I think. Wake Forest offense is better than LSU's, especially better than what LSU's offense was back in week 1. So this will be a big test for the Florida State defense. We'll see what they can do. But again, another huge game coming up this weekend involving rank versus rank. I've got Florida State coming in at number 20. BYU, I left at number 21. Don't really know what to do with them. They beat Wyoming 38-24. That's not overly impressive, but they're still sitting on just 1 loss, and that's to Oregon. Oregon's a top 25 team, so BYU for the time being remains in the UNCLELOU top 25. I've got Texas A&M at 22 and Arkansas at 23. What a great game this was this past weekend. Field goal hits the very top of the upright, not the side of the upright, it was weird. It literally landed on top of the upright, bounced 2 yards backwards into the end zone. No good. Texas A&M wins 22-20, an unbelievable game. If those two teams played 10 times, each team would win 5 games. I've got Texas A&M at 22. I've got Arkansas at 23. Arkansas, of course, plays Alabama this weekend at home. Home game for Arkansas. If Arkansas somehow were to pull off this upset, it would be monumental. We'll see. I don't know that Arkansas has got the defense to contain that Alabama offense, and offensively, I just don't know. I just don't know if they're going to be able to keep up. And Texas A&M plays on the road at Mississippi State. So both of these teams in theory could lose this coming weekend. We'll see, but I've got Texas A&M at 22, Arkansas at 23. Two new teams in the top 25 at 24 and 25, and they're both Kansas teams. Unbelievable. Kansas at 24 with a big win over previously undefeated Duke. One of the weirdest games of the weekend just because of the teams involved. Undefeated Kansas versus undefeated Duke, right? And Kansas gets the win. Congratulations. It looked like Kansas was going to run away with it. Give Duke some credit. They hung around, ended up being a one-score win for Kansas. But still, Kansas sitting at 4-0, the first time they've won 4 games in a season since 2009. Kansas could lose the rest of their games the rest of the year. This would still be the best year they've had in over 12 years. Amazing start for Kansas. And man, Lance Leopold is not going to be there long, is he? Somebody's going to come and get Lance Leopold away from Kansas here pretty soon. In Kansas State, of course, I move into the top 25 with a win over Oklahoma this past weekend. What a great game that was. I hate to, it always sounds like I'm trying to take something away from the team that won and I'm not. But to me, Oklahoma letting Adrian Martinez do that to them is more an indication of Oklahoma's defense being bad again than it is anything Kansas State did. We've seen Adrian Martinez play for 3 years at Nebraska, and we saw him play for 3 weeks at Kansas State, and it wasn't very good until yesterday or 2 days ago against Oklahoma. He was running all over the place. He was completing passes all over the place. If Saturday was the only time you ever saw Adrian Martinez play quarterback in college, you'd think he was a Heisman contender. But I've got Kansas State at 25. I thought about leaving them unranked because they do have that loss to Tulane, which is a bad loss. Now, if you're wondering who would be my next teams in, it's every other undefeated team. UCLA is still undefeated. Syracuse is still undefeated, but they are out. I'm here to tell you Syracuse is horrible. I watched them play Virginia on Friday night, I think it was, because there was nothing else, no other game on. Syracuse is absolutely horrible, but they're 4-0. UCLA, Syracuse, I believe TCU is still undefeated. So you've got some undefeated teams knocking on the door. Eventually, if a team is undefeated, you're going to have to put them in the top 25. Winning's got to mean something, right? I don't think UCLA would beat the majority of these teams in the top 25, but if they keep winning, you're going to have to put them in there. Same thing for Syracuse, TCU, on and on. But there you go. That's my top 25 heading into week 5 of the 2022 college football season. Again, be sure and let me know down below what you think I got wrong. Who should be ranked that I don't have ranked, and who would you take out? So if you think UCLA should be ranked, that's fine. Tell me who you think should be taken out. Let me know down below what you think. Really appreciate everybody watching. Have a good morning.